Which 3 characters are going to the moon? This is something that's been hinted at since early on, and something fans have been talking about for just as long. And with the trip to the moon basically right around the corner, I think it's time we figured out who this 3-person team will consist of. That's why in this video I'm going to discuss which 3 characters will go to the moon. Be warned that this will contain spoilers. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your 3 characters. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment goes to Cool Gamers, who showed some love to Dr. Stone's best girl, Turquoise. If you'd like more Dr. Stone and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. So to get started, let's quickly go over what we know has to happen for this moon team. The first mention was back in chapter 83, when Senku asked Tsukasa who he would take to the moon. Of course, this was back when we didn't even have the Medusas yet, so it's worth mentioning that this was some top-tier foreshadowing. Anyway, Tsukasa says he would take Taiju, then Chrome, because he would have more stamina than Senku. Then the idea of a moon team comes up again when, what do you know, we actually have to go to the moon. This time they add the caveat of a pilot saying that it would be Ryusui, which, I mean, duh. Nobody even has their driver's license besides Gen, so Ryusui's kind of the obvious choice. Then they mention a scientist, although interestingly enough, the group implies that it would definitely be Senku. So it's interesting to see the different approach of smartest versus most in-shape scientist. Then they mention they'll need the mightiest guy around, who would obviously be Tsukasa. Finally, in chapter 209, the roles of scientist, warrior, and pilot are reaffirmed, but this time we're actually shown Senku, Tsukasa, and Ryusui filling those roles. Not necessarily confirming these designations, but definitely leading you to believe that this is who it's going to be. But that's everything we know so far about the kind of team we'll need. Now, let's just go ahead and start with the obvious. There is no doubt in my mind that Ryusui is going to be the pilot. Again, like I said, nobody is nearly as talented as Ryusui when it comes to piloting, or even controllers in general thanks to those gaming sessions of his. So he's really the only one fit to pilot a space rocket. Keep in mind that astronauts specifically train for piloting spacecrafts. You can be the smartest guy in the world and know every meticulous detail about the rocket, but if you don't have the necessary skills, then you can't pilot the spacecraft. Now, at this point, I also need to mention why Ryusui is essential to the actual moon battle or moon duel or whatever we're going to call it. Like I said in my endgame video, there is 10 billion% going to be some kind of talk no jutsu on the moon with Y-Man. With the ethical questions of mass petrification and immortality lingering in the story, this moon team is going to have some serious Q&A with Y-Man about the Medusas, why he did what he did, and how this technology should be used. Or as Dr. Zeno Houston Wingfield would probably call it, inelegant ethical questions that only inferior intellects would bother pondering. And you know, as inelegant as these questions may be, they're definitely going to come up at some point when the team confronts Y-Man. Now, I'm not a betting man, mainly because my luck is worse than Senku's, but I'm willing to wager the idea of greed is going to come up. If Y-Man petrified the Earth to save the planet from humanity's destructive tendencies, or on the flip side, if Y-Man is another mad scientist like Zeno who believes humanity should advance science and industry beyond its ethical limits, then obviously the idea of greed is going to be a big part of this conversation. And what do you know, we just so happen to have our own trust fund Luffy. Of course, Ryusui was introduced so that the Kingdom of Science could have a top-tier navigator. But the other reason he was added to the story is because his character helps expand on this theme of desire. In fact, he's been driving our poor boy Gen mad with his constant reminder that desire is noble. And this is because Dr. Stone explores the limits of science and innovation. So who better to help explore that theme than a himbo with more money than God who also happens to have a heart of gold? I mean, it's no secret that Ryusui is a lot like Senku. They both have something they're wildly passionate about. In Ryusui's case, that's literally anything money can buy. In fact, the guy can't even control himself over the thought of a little olive oil. On top of that, each of them is so obsessed with their passions that they tend to look like villains. Just look at our boy Ryusui scheming to control the media as soon as someone mentions the idea of TV. But like Senku, we know that Ryusui is selfish for the sake of others. And when you have him faced against a character on the opposite end of this greed spectrum who's only selfish for the sake of, well, themselves, then it creates scenes like the one with Zeno in South America where Ryusui pushes the idea that you can be greedy and create a better world for others at the same time. So on top of being the only person with any of the necessary piloting skills, Ryusui is absolutely essential to this moon team because he will need to be there when the theme of greed inevitably comes into the conversation. And if you paid any attention to my endgame video, then you know that the next member of this moon team is of course Tsukasa. Pretty easy because, like the characters themselves said, he's just stupid OP. Now, you could argue he'll want to stay behind just in case someone tries to take over the Earth during all the commotion, but Tsukasa will likely trust Hyoga and the other warriors to take care of things while he helps defeat humanity's biggest threat. Plus, you know, he probably wants to speed up this whole civilization thing so he can go back to buying his baby sister thousands of toys. But like you probably know by now, Tsukasa is another crucial element to this conversation of science and desire. If on the one hand Y-Man is a mad scientist, then Tsukasa will do like he did with Zeno and settle things rather swiftly. But if Y-Man is someone who claims that humanity's greed and self-destructive tendencies need to be stopped, then having Tsukasa there would basically be the perfect situation. Ryusui could tee things up by saying desire is noble, and then Tsukasa can back it up by explaining how he's come to give in to science. Tsukasa was all about preserving nature and stopping divided interests. But now he's realized he's better off allowing science to advance and being there to stop things whenever they get out of control. So to literally be there at the current peak of scientific innovation would be the perfect way to have his character arc come full circle. And incidentally have the story itself come full circle, since the whole thing started when Tsukasa decided it'd be a fun idea to play God. So that's why we need to have Tsukasa on this moon team. Not just because he's an absolute badass, but also because it would be perfect for his character and the story as a whole. Now, having shown why Ryusui and Tsukasa need to go to the moon, it's time we talk about Senku. Actually, before we do that, let me just rule out Zeno, Chrome, and Suika. First, while Zeno going to the moon makes sense since he has more experience than Senku, I just don't see how you could have Zeno leading the series-defining battle. As much as I love the guy, it's just not happening. Same thing with Suika. As cool as it would be to have our newest science assistant go to the moon, Suika already had her own time to shine, so I just don't see it happening again. Plus, as smart as she is, Suika just is not smart enough to lead a team to the moon. But now we're left with Senku and Chrome. To be fair, it would be very fitting to have Chrome take over for Senku and lead his mission. And, like Tsukasa pointed out, he does have more stamina. But on top of being smarter than Chrome, there's a few reasons why Senku needs to be the one to lead the moon team. First, like I've been saying, Senku is our protagonist, so it'd be weird to have him on the sideline for this series-defining final battle. Plus, we know Senku is always taking on the lion's share of responsibility, especially considering how Byakuya sacrificed so much to help him save the world. Naturally, Senku will want to make this his job rather than anyone else's to lead this mission and finish what his father started. Now, before I mention the last reason why this needs to be Senku, let me just quickly drop my theory from the endgame video. Again, if you haven't watched it, go ahead and check it out for my full thoughts. Basically, there's a good chance that Senku will go up to the moon and, assuming they really do have a return capsule, will some way or another get left behind. Or at the very least he'll try to. Each major battle with petrification has ended with a lone survivor so that we can touch on the idea that we're not as alone as we think we are. So it only makes sense that this idea would come up again in the final war to decide who controls the Medusas. But finally, the last reason Senku needs to be on the moon team is so that he can ultimately be the one to redeem Y-Man, and find a way to use the Medusas for good instead of evil. As the leader of the Kingdom of Science, Senku has always been the one to see a person's redeeming qualities. He knew all along that Tsukasa had good intentions even though he was being a gigantic dummy, he knew Magma wasn't such a bad guy, and he knew that deep down his cartoonishly evil mentor was still capable of being a relatively decent human being. And as we've seen before, there is a big question of whether or not Y-Man is really as evil as we think he is. So who better to redeem that character than the protagonist who always manages to see the good in people? At this point you might ask, okay, but why? Why not have Y-Man be completely evil? Well, like the characters, each of the inventions in Dr. Stone can ultimately help to create a better world. sulfuric acid helps make medicine, dynamite led to the Nobel Prize, and the Medusas have miraculous healing properties. Keeping in theme with the inventions, Senku will inevitably reason with Y-Man and argue that there's a way to improve the lives of others using the Medusas without the whole mad science shtick. In turn, this will bring Dr. Stone full circle yet again, using Senku to hammer away the idea that there's always a way to use science for good. So on that note, this is why Senku, Ryusui, and Tsukasa need to be the 3 members of the Moon Team. It drives home the idea that desire is noble, addresses all the ethical dilemmas that have been raised so far, and reminds us that science can be used to create a better world. And that's it for this discussion. If you enjoyed this discussion, then make sure to like the video. Also make sure to comment with your thoughts on the Moon Team down below. And if you'd like more Dr. Stone and other manga discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.